All right, we're going to get a little intimate here and have fireside chat. Tucker Bailey, a partner with McKinsey Company. I lead a lot of our work in the security space. Pleasure to be joined by Adam Lee, the Chief Security Officer of Dominion Energy, a small organization with approximately $100 billion in assets in 18 states.
Yep.
And prior to joining Dominion, Adam spent several decades in the FBI, so brings that perspective as well. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Tucker. Good evening, everybody. It's great to be in New York. I think I'm the only one left with a tie since James left. So that's the Washington, D.C. coming to visit you. Habits are hard to break.
So Adam, one of the things we talked about is kind of managing complexity and, in a complex world, living in that boundary of chaos. An organization like Dominion, given kind of the way the world is going, in many cases it's getting less safe rather than more safe. Energy is kind of at the crosshairs of some of those threats. How do you think about the threats facing Dominion Energy?
Yeah, it's great because coming here today, I had my thoughts ordered around some of the things we had chatted about, but then hearing some of the other speakers, it's interesting. I've reordered my thoughts a bit. So if you think about Dominion Energy, $100 billion in assets, I think depending on how you measure us, the third largest energy company by most measure in the nation. But it's a company that still largely thinks of itself as the power company because it's over 100 years old, delivering power to consumers at the retail level, right? It's safe, reliable, affordable energy, and that's sort of the mission of Dominion Energy.
Jordan, can you make sure P11's muted?
That was interesting. Yeah, that wouldn't happen at Dominion. I'm just telling you. No. But really, thinking about compliance suits a power company, right? And if you're thinking about the regulatory environment that energy companies, power companies work in, it is a very tightly controlled environment. I mean, it is NERC standards for how high you build your walls around your compressor stations and your transmission stations. It's what your cybersecurity platforms have to look like, what end user accesses look like. It's audited every 3 to 6 years. We're on a 6-year cycle. I'm very happy to report. But it suits a power company. But Dominion Energy is an energy company. We have 7 nuclear reactors. We have a gas business. We're in 18 states. We have 65, about to build 2 additional solar farms spread out across the nation, all the way out to the Mojave Desert in California. We are a top-down company running a very diversified portfolio of energy production, transmission, and distribution. So that includes edge innovation. It includes exporting liquefied natural gas to all parts of the globe, which is a direct geopolitical threat to some nation-state adversaries. So that's where we sort of get to security being distinctly different than compliance. Certainly in our sector, compliance is order. Security is chaos, managing chaos, right? It's sort of the smart in school, smart on the bus. Are you looking around corners? Are you understanding the adversary? Are you looking at what the intentions of nation-state adversaries are to your business if you do pose that kind of a threat? Are you vulnerable to weaponized industrial control systems in your gas business? Are you vulnerable to third-party supply chain issues in the source code of switches and meters on your transmission system? And each one of these has an example somewhere in the world showing what can go wrong if you're not thinking about those things. Theft of intellectual property. We are about to build wind turbines about 30 miles offshore of the Dominion or the Virginia coast. The innovation, the technology that goes into that is remarkable. Moving natural gas and storing it. We have over 1 trillion square feet of natural gas in storage. That's not stored in tanks above ground. That's stored in the geology of ground. We move it in pipelines and we push it back into the ground and then extract it and move it on. The technology is remarkable. And in order to secure that, you have to be looking around corners. You have to have relationships with government, with the 3-letter agencies. You have to know what the adversaries are doing.
So, Adam, thanks for that. And as you think about that, as you think about kind of this multi-tiered threat and massive footprint, physical, cyber, et cetera, how do you organize internally to address that how do you move away from some of the standard playbooks to being a little bit more dynamic and addressing some of these threats?
Right. Well, I think a large reason why we're here together is we really looked at, I've been at Dominion Energy after 22 years in the FBI. I came to Dominion Energy a year ago. But I'm kind of cheating because I was the executive in charge of the operations for the FBI in the state of Virginia. So I had a pretty deep relationship with all critical infrastructure, but in particular Dominion, just because of what a critical asset it was, number one, to the nation. But in terms of a vulnerability within my AOR, it was a flashing red light for me as a special agent in charge of the FBI. So, so I had really worked with the security groups that were disparate and spread out across the enterprise, as you know, because we did bring McKinsey in over my year there to help us build an integrated threat center that really took what we understood in the cyber area and married it up through sort of an understanding of threat intelligence and a process of ingesting and understanding what our adversaries are up to, and then marrying that understanding with what was happening in our physical footprint and where we might be vulnerable. Just a footnote that if you think about a company like Dominion, it's largely an engineer's culture, but it is also a business. And the very rational, and this might be a good learning point because we're cross-sector here, but it's very rational for the leaders within your business to focus on the biggest revenue centers for the business, the things that produce the greatest immediate market value for your company. For us, that's our 2200 megawatt producing nuclear reactors. Those are our gas, brand new. I mean, these gas generation facilities are just marvels of engineering. You can eat off the floor in these things. They are the crown jewels. They are the value center for our company. But we're also heavily invested in innovation in the renewable space. So in our solar facilities, the compliance magic number is 75 megawatts. So a lot of those solar farms produce far below that regulated amount of energy. But we still are trying to innovate there, but we still have network access there. We still have controls. We still have SCADA systems. We still have the things that push that energy into the power grid of the United States, and we sell it to a whole variety of companies out there. So from a security perspective, we're looking at those vulnerabilities, the threats, the gaps, the vulnerabilities. We're not just looking at how do we harden our valuable assets.
So let me follow up on that. A two-pronged question. One, you exist in a business ecosystem, as you mentioned. How do you engage the business? And a little bit to Justin's point, like how do you enable the business and allow them to innovate? And where does the role of risk play in this equation?
So fortunate for me in my role, maybe unfortunate for the world and sort of the future of risk and energy, but we have Ukraine 2015, 2016. We have weaponization of industrial control systems in the Middle East. We have theft of intellectual property, losing wind-generating turbine intellectual property of the United States, closing businesses. Now they are manufactured overseas, and we're buying them back here. So those are very real threats. They are things that our leaders within the company have observed over time. They're things that they've heard from the trade organizations. They've heard through benchmarking exercises, through fora like this. And they know that energy is particularly vulnerable to nation-state actors and global threats. So we have a pretty astute leadership team at the C-suite level. I do think, though, as you move down, you have folks, again, you start seeping into that engineer's culture, and you have folks that don't necessarily see around corners the way that a career FBI agent or somebody who spends a lot of time talking about these issues do. So that's really been the challenge, is to socialize our new posture, our new threat center, the way we manage threats, to sort of moving out of corporate security. We don't even call ourselves corporate security anymore, into sort of an enterprise defense mentality, threat management mentality.
And I want to come back to one of the things you mentioned about relying on government institutions, federal agencies, state and local, et cetera. How do you think about that ecosystem, and where do you see the role of the government, private sector, regulated industries, given that this is a challenge that is a nationwide challenge, not an individual company challenge?
Sure. So my first leadership role in the FBI was in 2005 in the FBI's nascent cyber division. Stood up in 2003. By 2005, it was sort of finding its legs. It was getting its staffing up to where it needed to be. But it really didn't understand its mission space. And there was still sort of, DHS was finding its way. We didn't have the presidential directives and things that we have now to sort of own the lane in the road as far as investigating and interacting with business. Fast forward to 2019, the landscape of interaction between critical infrastructure and government has changed dramatically. So I was on with Brian Harrell, the Senate confirmed lead for DHS's critical infrastructure. I sit on the Classified Intelligence Forum with DHS. Anyone in the sector, that's a cross-sector function, but if you have a top secret clearance, they will share intelligence products with you, and you sort of assess, you're almost consulting with them, the value. But we're sharing information, we're having robust discussions about what some of the intentions of hostile nation-state actors are to critical infrastructure. It's really the ingest of indicators of compromise, the relationships. It's really value moving both ways. We used to in our SOC, and I think it's probably true for everyone here in your outer perimeter and your network, you would let the hundreds of thousands of pings and scans you're getting every day just drop on the floor. Right? If it's not getting in that outer fence, I kind of don't care. I care when it gets in, and then I'll give it to an analyst to examine and see who it is that's knocking at our door. But there's valuable intelligence there on what's falling on the floor. If you can resolve those IPs back to a nation state, you might have a better idea of who's looking at you. And even the more rudimentary attacks, even there's information around those in terms of what the intentions might be. And not surprising, if you did an analysis of those, and we're in the process of doing it now, there are three-letter agencies that are very interested in that.
So how do you get the conditions where some of the attacks you're seeing in the cyber realm, you're probably seeing from some of the other regulated utilities as well? How do you coordinate amongst peers of Dominion across the U.S. and thinking more as a critical national infrastructure provider, sharing that information and learning from each other?
Yeah, it's great, and in fact, there are folks here that I was sharing with just in the reception beforehand. We're not a first-to-market company, right? We are a public utility. I think that does give us a unique opportunity to benchmark with one another, to really share best practices without sort of the concern that maybe it's going to get leveraged against you or you're going to give somebody an advantage. I think part of being a highly regulated environment and part of sort of being within a sector where, number one, a lot of folks are very closely networked aligned. I mean, you can't, I'll save my Virginia colloquialisms, but there's a whole lot of FBI retired executives in the energy business running security. And I think that's sort of shows that the sector, I think, is getting a little more aware of what critical infrastructure means to our adversaries and what it ought to mean to us. If you really want to put the hurt on the United States, shut off its power. I mean, we take for granted that we have cold food stores, that our MRI machines at the hospitals work, that we can sit here in Times Square and it's not, rotting garbage in the streets because we have energy. We are supplying energy, and it's enough energy, and it's resilient and reliable enough to keep our society moving forward. And our adversaries fully understand that if you want to erode the confidence of the American people in its government and in its critical infrastructure and in its ability to provide the basic human needs that we all take for granted, shut the power off.
Adam, final question. Where does this go? So project forward 5 years, 10 years. Like, how do you see both the security landscape evolving in the energy sector? How do you see the threat landscape evolving, and kind of what either gives you concern or gives you hope as you look forward?
Yeah, I mean, the things that keep me up at night, we have, I mean, we're in the process with the IoT and we have DJI drones that we have looking for trees hanging over our transmission lines. Well, DJI drones made in China, are they networked, right? And it's the whole issue there about know your supply chain, know where your equipment is manufactured. The industrial control systems, if it's a sensor or a switch and it's manufactured in a country or manufactured by a company that does business in a hostile nation, is there something in the source code that you will not pick up in your SOC? You will not see it. I don't care how robust your logs are out of your industrial control systems. If it's in the source code, it'll take that patch that's going to come in when it's time to activate that device. And that is the chaos that you think about in this sector, is what is lying there that you have to look around a corner to see. And the technology is getting so sophisticated that these are things that you really don't identify until they're activated. And then when you're there, you're in big trouble.
Well, Adam, thanks for what you're doing protecting critical national infrastructure, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.